Welcome back. So what kind of concrete steps can be taken to stop the bleeding of this wound that just does not heal? Several years ago, President Obama launched an effort to find the actionable steps that needed taking in our criminal justice system. And a senior policy advisor on the White House Domestic Policy Council was Malanka Clark, now in Detroit as the CEO of the Hudson Weber Foundation. And she's with me now after coming off of that task force, which was called COPS, Community-Oriented Policing Services. Malanka, I really appreciate your time. Before we get into these actionable steps I want to start, though, with how resistant to change you have found systems to be, whether they're public or private, but especially in the public world. It seems to be sometimes difficult to get change to be embraced.
I agree with that. It's tremendously hard work. I think and as we're seeing now with sort of these issues raised again into the national consciousness, it does seem to take a literal kind of ground shifting beneath our feet for folks to commit to making the changes that are needed. And even then, you know, obviously the verdict is out until we get on the other side of it. There's been talk before and not always follow through. Well,
that's really true. These are sort of in a laboratory setting in our heads right now. But let's talk about some of the things that you think, especially after we've watched so much videotape of things gone wrong. Where do we start? What would help and be really actionable if we could change tomorrow?
Yeah, so I'm pleased to join you today with the you mentioned at the top of the intro, the work that I was able to do with the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. It was then President Obama, and I was with the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, serving as Chief of Staff to that task force. That report and concrete recommendations was written in 2015. And here we are in 2020.
Yeah.
Those problems that report addressed have not been. We still see the incidents like the one with George Floyd that brings so many of us to the table today. I would say that to talk about policing specifically, one of the things that's particularly hard is changing the culture. And there are many different aspects to that, but certainly the way departments recruit staff, the way folks are trained in terms of how they're engaging with the community, and the accountability mechanisms are what can really make the change that, you know, I would assume we both would like to see occur. And I just specifically with the George Floyd incident, I think the thing that was, you know, it's so horrifying to see that image. But what was so particularly disturbing was the brazenness with which the officer was looking at spectators of what he was doing. And I think that speaks to, you know, it's not about changing hearts and minds. Someone like that is who they are. But what you could tell was he did not expect to be held accountable for those actions. And that's why that's the most important piece, that accountability piece.
The other thing, the old saying being that the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. We also saw other officers surrounding the scene and not doing anything, not responding. That's why they're now charged. But that also speaks to the culture that's inside a lot of police departments that are sort of insular, and it just is seen as wrong to sort of step against one of your colleagues in the field.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And what a failure to see. I'm sorry,
I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, it's okay. But we've seen this list that's been making the rounds on the internet, the 8 can't wait. And these are 8 steps that I think in many ways are born out of your findings from the work that you did. And they include things like banning chokeholds at all, requiring de-escalation rather than a ratcheting up of it. And one of them is this duty to intervene when you see an officer acting improperly.
Yeah, I have seen those recommendations, and I love that they have that specificity and concreteness to them, so that folks can't throw up their hands and say, well, what is it that can be done? I think they're informed and solid, and I would actually note that one of the people behind Campaign Zero who put out those recommendations was actually a task force member on the President's Task Force, and that's Brittany Packnett, a community activist. I would say, just to kind of connect the dots, I think that, the one thing to be thoughtful of as these policies are brought to bear is to ensure that any department, as they consider how they are serving their community, right, not just occupying the community, but is to make sure those policies are informed by the community that they serve. And I think that if departments authentically saw that as their mandate and had their use of force policies, many of which are outlined, many of the recommendations in the 8 Can't Wait are use of force policies. If those could be informed by the community, we would get to a place where we would have meaningful and accountable guidance for officers as they operate in the streets and as they serve the communities that they ought to protect.
Lastly, so if we change the handbook a little bit, how do we change people's hearts and minds? That's a lot trickier thing to pull off. I'm going to assume that with all of your work, especially now at Hudson Weber, this is something you've thought about. How do we really change the way that people think in America?
Yeah, there's a saying, and it's often said around police culture that, but it's true in many environments, that culture eats policy for lunch, right?
Yes.
Sort of the tip of the iceberg is what you say you do, and all below the water are sort of those things that inform what actually happens. It's hard work. Training obviously is key, and there's use of force training that is absolutely important. But there are also other types of training, fair and impartial policing training, procedural justice training, and that's an interesting one. I know when I was working with the task force, was interested to hear that the way that officers are treated within police departments, if they think that they're treated fairly, if the decisions that are made are transparent, if folks are held accountable for when they do things wrong and they see that that's visible to their community, that absolutely informs how they then operate externally outside of the department. But that culture, the culture that lives inside the department, will absolutely inform what happens on the outside, and that's
Malenka, I so appreciate your time. I look forward to more conversations on this very topic in the near future, and stay safe. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
You bet. We'll be joined by my partner Kimberly Gill on Flashpoint right after this.